I wiped my hands with a rag soaked in machine oil and took a step back, looking at my brainchild. The new engine gleamed with chrome in the darkness of the hangar, ready for tomorrow's test. 74 years had passed, and his hands still held the wrench firmly, his eyes still clearly recognizing the smallest flaws in the mechanisms. The engine was smaller than previous models, but 20% more powerful. If the tests were successful, customers would be lining up. And if not, well, they couldn't fail. I'd spent 2 years developing it, and I'd invested all my knowledge as a design engineer. The lights in the hangar were dim, but I had enough. My eyes had grown accustomed to the semi-darkness over the years, and my hands found the right tools on their own. The airplane stood before me like a faithful friend, a small two-seat monoplane of my own design. I had built it 5 years ago specifically for testing new engines. Every detail had been checked, every connection tested repeatedly. Tomorrow he'll take my latest project into the air, and I'll know if 2 years of sleepless nights were worth the result. The sound of footsteps on the concrete floor made me turn around. Corbin, my 48-year-old son, was entering the hangar, wearing an impeccably pressed shirt and expensive Italian leather shoes. Behind him was Lynette, my daughter-in-law, whose painted nails glistened in the dim light of the bulbs. She wore a dress that cost more than I spent on food in a month. They looked like they'd gotten lost on the way to the country club where they usually spent Friday nights. "Dad, what are you doing here at this hour?" Corbin stopped a few feet away from the plane, as if afraid of getting his clothes dirty with machine oil or dust. "It's 9 o'clock at night. Getting ready for tomorrow's flight," I replied, not taking my eyes off the engine. "I want to check all the fuel system connections again." Lynette grumbled and pulled a lace handkerchief from her purse, covering her nose with it. "It smells awful like gasoline in here, and it's cold as a freezer." "This is a hangar, dear, not a beauty parlor," I remarked dryly. "It always smells like fuel and engine oil in here." Corbin stepped closer, but not too close to the airplane. His face took on the caring expression I'd learned to recognize as an ill-fitting mask over the past few months. "Dad, we need to talk. A serious talk." "About what?" I crouched next to the engine, checking the tightness of the mounting bolts. It was fine, but an extra check never hurts. "About your flying." Corbin looked around the hangar, the airplane, the tools, parts, and blueprints scattered everywhere on the workbench. "Do you realize what age you are? You're 74 years old." "Thanks for reminding me. Otherwise, I woke up this morning and forgot how old I was." Lynette took a few more steps toward the hangar exit, clearly feeling out of place among all the machinery and smells. "Wayne, honey, maybe it's time to think about more relaxing pursuits, fishing, for instance, or golf. You have friends at the golf club." "Friends at the golf club," I grinned to myself. The only thing I had at the golf club was the membership Corbin had insisted I buy 3 years ago, claiming I needed to socialize more with people my age. People my age who discussed prostate problems and grandchildren, complained about youth, and bragged about retirement savings. I finally took my eyes off the engine and looked at both of them. In the son's eyes, I could read the ill-concealed anxiety, but not for his father, but for something else. Lynette was biting her lip, smearing the expensive lipstick she'd recently bragged about buying in New York. "You're afraid I'm going to crash," I said affirmatively, standing up and wiping my hands on my work coveralls. "Of course we're afraid." Corbin spread his hands, feigning despair. "You're our only. We care about you, Dad. And this business, it's dangerous, especially when you're the one doing the test flights." "And who's going to do them? A hired pilot?" I hung a rag on a hook next to the workbench. "No one knows my airplanes better than I do. No one feels every engine vibration, every change in the machine's behavior." "That's exactly why we're worried," Lynette interjected, taking another step toward the door. "Wayne, honey, think about us. About what will become of us if—" She didn't finish, but I understood the direction of her thoughts perfectly. What would become of them? Not what would become of me if something went wrong. What would become of them, of their plans, of the inheritance they'd already mentally divided? "If something goes wrong, you'll get insurance," I said calmly, watching their reactions. "The company is insured for $10 million. Corbin twitched as if he'd been electrocuted, then quickly tried to hide that reaction behind a mask of indignation. "Dad, what are you talking about? We're not thinking about money." "No? I squatted down next to the engine, pretending to check the oil lines. Then what are you thinking about? About you, about your safety. Corbin's voice carried a note of poorly concealed irritation. You've become more absent-minded lately, forgetful, distracted? I lifted my head from the engine. Yeah, last week you forgot to turn off the stove, and the day before yesterday you lost your car keys. Lynette didn't find them until 2 hours later. I got up slowly, wiping my hands. I hadn't lost the keys. I just put them in another pocket of my jacket, and I'd taken my time looking for them, watching Lynette scurry around the house looking for them. And I turned off the stove. But Corbin didn't notice because he was too busy talking on the phone with someone about the price of real estate in our neighborhood. Maybe we should think about selling the company, Lynette suggested cautiously, clearly deciding it was a good time for the main part of their pre-rehearsed speech. As long as it's still worth something. Real estate in Bethany Beach is appreciating in value every month. The lot under the hangar could be sold profitably for development. They'll build beautiful homes here overlooking the ocean. That's it, the main purpose of their visit. I nodded, pretending to seriously consider the offer. And what am I going to do? Sit at home and watch TV from morning to night? Travel! Corbin perked up, sensing that his father wasn't rejecting the idea right away. You've always wanted to visit Europe, haven't you? Paris, Rome, London. When did I ever say I wanted to visit Europe? I asked, genuinely surprised. Well, I mean, everyone your age wants to. Corbin looked slightly embarrassed. Cruises, tours, museums. Lynette walked over to the hangar window and looked out, where the lights of the evening city twinkled behind the dirty glass. You know, Vane, Corbin's right. You deserve a vacation after all these years of work. You've spent your whole life building this business, putting your soul into every airplane. It's time to think about yourself, about your health. I am thinking about myself, I replied, walking over to the airplane and checking the aileron mounts. Tomorrow I'll test the new engine. And the day after tomorrow, she insisted. The day after tomorrow, I'll start working on an improved version for high-altitude flying. Corbin sighed heavily and exchanged a meaningful look with his wife. I didn't miss this silent dialogue. They'd obviously discussed my plans beforehand, rehearsed this conversation, thought out the arguments. I wonder how much time was spent in preparation. Dad, listen. Corbin stepped closer, gently placing his hand on my shoulder, careful not to get my expensive shirt dirty. We just want you to be safe, to live many more years in comfort and peace. Safe and preferably away from airplanes, I added mentally, watching the expression on his face. Okay, I said out loud, deciding to test their reactions. Let's do it this way. I'll run the test tomorrow, and afterward we'll have another serious discussion about the future of the company. Corbin's face instantly tensed, as if I'd said something wrong. Is tomorrow's test really mandatory? Shouldn't it be postponed for a week? Mandatory. The customer is waiting for the results, and I've already postponed the test twice. What customer? Inquired Lynette, turning from the window. A company out of Miami. They're interested in small cargo planes to deliver mail and small cargo between the Florida islands. It was true, but not all of it. The customer did exist, but the contract hadn't been signed yet, and they were looking at several options from different manufacturers. However, I wasn't about to go into detail and reveal that my company was only one of the contenders. I see. Corbin removed his hand from my shoulder and took a step back. Then we'll wait until tomorrow. But after the trials, we'll talk, I agreed. They headed for the hangar exit, and I watched them go, noting how quickly Lynette strode toward the door, clearly anxious to be out in the fresh air. At the threshold, she stopped and turned around, and for a moment something that might have passed for genuine concern flashed in her eyes. Wayne, be careful tomorrow. Please, double-check everything. I always check everything twice, I replied, and sometimes 3 times. As the sound of their footsteps faded into the yard and the lights of their car disappeared around the corner of the road, I was left alone in the hangar with thoughts that had been lingering for months. Corbin visited me much more often, always finding an excuse to ask me about the company's financial affairs, about insurance policies, about the size of the savings in my bank accounts. Lynette began making subtle remarks about my age and supposedly declining health, even though my last physical exam showed that I was in great shape for my age. And last week, I happened to overhear their phone conversation with a realtor about the market value of my house and the lot on which the hangar stood. Corbin was naming figures, asking about the timing of the paperwork, inquiring about taxes on estate sales. When he noticed me in the doorway, he quickly ended the conversation, citing that he was calling about the sale of his acquaintance's house. I walked over to the airplane and slowly walked around it, checking all the exterior details one last time. Tomorrow's flight would be far from the first of my life, and with any luck, not the last. I had been flying for 50 years, ever since I got my pilot's license in the Army. I knew every engine sound, every vibration of the rudders, every change in the behavior of the machine in different flight modes. Age? Yes, 74 years old, but his hands are still steady, his eyesight is sharp, and his reactions are fast enough to control the airplane. The engine to be tested tomorrow was the result of 2 years of work. I'd spent all my spare time and much of my savings developing it. If it performs well, the company will be awarded a contract that will ensure a trouble-free existence for several more years. If not, well, then Corbin and Lynette would get what they'd been patiently waiting for. I turned off the lights in the hangar, carefully locked the doors, and headed for home, thinking about tomorrow. The new engine was going to perform at its best, I was sure of it, and tomorrow's flight would show me what family ties were worth when it came to $10 million in insurance and inheritance. The morning was clear, with a light breeze blowing in off the ocean. I woke up at 6:30 as usual, without an alarm clock. Over the years, my body had grown accustomed to early rising, and now my internal clock worked more accurately than any mechanism. I drank coffee in the kitchen, standing by the window and watching the sun slowly rise above the horizon, coloring the sky in soft orange tones. The weather for the flight was perfect. Cloudless skies, light winds, excellent visibility. By 7 in the morning, I was already in the hangar doing one last pre-flight check. Every bolt, every wire, every connection, everything was inspected with the utmost care. The new engine gleamed in the morning light streaming through the hangar windows. I checked the oil level, the fuel system, the electrical connections. All indicators were normal. All systems were working like clockwork. The airplane was rolled out onto the runway at exactly 8 in the morning. I was in no hurry. Haste in aviation was a deadly luxury that no pilot could afford, especially not a test pilot. I sat down in the cockpit, fastened my seat belts, checked the operation of the instruments. Radio communication worked clearly. All indicators showed normal values. The engine started at the first time, ran smoothly at idle speed. The takeoff went without problems. The airplane left the ground easily, as if it was born to fly. The new engine pulled confidently without vibrations and extraneous sounds. I gained altitude smoothly, controlling all flight parameters. At an altitude of 1,000 meters, I turned toward the ocean, where it was safe to conduct tests without worrying about other aircraft or ground objects. The first half hour of the flight was excellent. The engine was running smoothly, fuel consumption was in line with estimates, and temperature conditions remained within normal limits. I conducted various tests: climb, descent, flight at different speeds, checking controllability at different modes. The airplane obeyed the rudder obediently, like a faithful horse under an experienced rider. The problems began on the 42nd minute of the flight. At first, it was a barely noticeable vibration in the control stick, so slight that I thought I was imagining it. But after a few seconds, the vibration increased, and I realized that something was going wrong. The gauges were still showing normal, but experience told me that trouble was brewing. I reduced the engine speed and began to turn cautiously towards the airfield. The distance to the landing strip was about 15 kilometers, quite surmountable with normal engine operation, but the vibration continued to increase, and now there was a strange metallic sound that did not bode well. Suddenly, the engine temperature began to rise. The thermometer arrow moved to the right faster than I would have liked to see. I reduced the RPM even more, trying to prevent overheating, but this only made things worse. The airplane started losing altitude faster than planned. Now I was faced with a dilemma: try to make it to the airfield on an overheated engine or look for an emergency landing. The choice was made for me. There was a thud. The engine shook so violently that the whole airplane shook, and black smoke poured from under the hood. One of the cylinders had obviously failed, and probably more than one. I immediately turned off the ignition and switched to planing flight mode. The altitude at this point was about 800 meters. There was a wooded area with sparse clearings below. Not a good place to land, but I had no choice. I looked out for a suitable clearing while trying to maximize my planning. Every meter of altitude was worth its weight in gold. I found a suitable clearing about 3 kilometers from the shore. It was small, surrounded by tall pine trees, but long enough for a light airplane to land if I was very lucky. I turned upwind and began my approach, praying to all the gods that I wouldn't hit the treetops. The approach was too steep. The plane was descending faster than I wanted, and I realized that I would not make it to the clearing. The tops of the pine trees loomed ahead, and a collision was inevitable. At the last moment, I tried to lift the nose of the car to soften the blow, but it was too late. The left wing hit a pine tree, the airplane spun, and I felt the world around me become a chaos of cracking metal, crunching wood, and deafening rumble. The machine tumbled between the trees, losing wings and parts of the fuselage. I instinctively covered my head with my hands and waited for this hell to end. The final blow came on the cockpit. Something heavy hit me on the head, and the world went dark. I don't know how long I lay unconscious among the wreckage of the airplane. I woke up to a sharp pain in my chest and the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. My head was splitting, my left arm wouldn't listen, and something in my right side ached with every breath. There were pieces of metal lying around, shards of dashboard, shreds of paneling. The engine, my 2-year labor, lay a few meters away from me, turned into a pile of mangled metal. Fuel spilled on the ground, mixing with needles and leaves. Fortunately, there was no fire. Otherwise, I would have been burned alive among the debris. I tried to get up, but my legs wouldn't hold me up. My left leg was obviously broken, and the right one was just not listening. With my hands, I managed to free myself from the wreckage of the cabin door, which pressed me to the ground. Every movement felt like a sharp pain in my ribs and head. I didn't have my cell phone with me. I never took it on a flight, considering it an unnecessary distraction. The airplane's radio station was broken, as were most of the instruments. My only hope was that the airfield controllers would notice my disappearance from the radar and send a search party. The sun was already high, which meant that several hours had passed since the crash. I lay on my back, looking at the sky through the gaps between the branches of pine trees, and tried not to think about the fact that I could die here, in the middle of the forest, without knowing whether the rescue team would find me. My strength gradually left me, and my consciousness became clearer and clearer. Time stretched infinitely slowly. I could hear birds singing, the sound of wind in the trees, the distant hum of engines somewhere in the sky. Each time the sound came closer, I tried to shout, but my voice was weak, and I doubted anyone could hear me from the heights. Toward evening, it began to get colder. I began to shiver, which was a bad sign. My body was losing heat faster than it could produce it. The bleeding from my head seemed to have stopped, but the pain in my chest increased. Every breath came with difficulty, and I suspected several ribs were broken. Rescuers found me the next morning. I heard voices still in the distance. Then the sound of a helicopter overhead. Someone was yelling, giving commands. Then a paramedic in an orange jacket descended beside me. "There's a casualty! He's conscious!" he shouted into the radio station. I tried to say something, but only a wheeze came out of my throat. The paramedic leaned over me, checking my pulse and breathing. "Don't try to talk. We're going to get you out of here. What's your name?" "Wayne." "Aldridge," I wheezed. "All right, Mr. Aldridge. We're going to examine you now and get you to the hospital." The next half hour passed like a blur. I was carefully moved onto a stretcher. My cervical spine was fixed, and IVs were placed. The pain was so intense that I lost consciousness several times. The helicopter took off, and I saw the crash site for the last time, the scattered wreckage of what had been my airplane yesterday. At the hospital, the fight for my life began. Doctors scurried around the gurney on which I was being wheeled through the corridors, shouting medical terms I didn't understand. Someone shined a flashlight in my eyes, checking my pupil response. Someone listened to my lungs with a stethoscope. "Concussion, fractured left tibia, multiple rib fractures, internal bleeding," I heard scraps of phrases. "Prep the OR. We need an emergency surgery." The anesthesia took effect quickly, and the world went dark again. This time it was deep and serene, without dreams or nightmares. Somewhere far away I could hear doctors' voices, sounds of medical devices, But it all seemed to be happening not with me, but with someone else. The surgery lasted several hours. Surgeons stopped internal bleeding, fixed broken ribs, and put a cast on my leg. When it was over, I was moved to the intensive care unit, where I spent the next 3 weeks in a state between life and death, hooked up to ventilators and heart monitors. The call came into Corbin's office at 2:30 in the afternoon. He was sitting at his glass-top desk in downtown Bethany Beach, reviewing paperwork on yet another real estate transaction, when the receptionist informed him that the Coast Guard was looking for him. Corbin frowned. The Coast Guard had never contacted him about a work-related matter before. "Mr. Aldridge? Corbin Aldridge?" The voice in the receiver sounded official and serious. "Yes, it's me. What's up?" "Sir, we're calling about your father, Wayne Aldridge. His plane disappeared from radar around 11 this morning. We've organized a search operation." Corbin felt his hands go cold, clutching the phone receiver. "Missing? What do you mean missing?" "The last radio contact was at 10:47 this morning, when he reported technical problems and his intention to return to base. Communication was cut off after that." Corbin swallowed, trying to gather his thoughts. "So, what are you assuming?" "We're hoping for the best, sir. There may have been a forced landing, and the radio station is out of commission. Our helicopters are already in the air, combing the area of the last location." After the conversation ended, Corbin sat motionless for several minutes, staring out the window at the busy city street. Passers-by hurried about their business. Cars drove in the flow of traffic. The world continued to spin as if nothing had happened. And somewhere in the woods or over the ocean lay the wreckage of his father's airplane. He dialed Lynette's number. "Honey, you need to sit down. I have some bad news." Lynette was just finishing a facial exfoliation at her beauty salon when the phone rang. Hearing her husband's voice, she was immediately alert. Corbin never called her at work without a serious reason. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping back into the next room where there were no customers. "Dad's plane crashed. The Coast Guard is conducting a search." Lynette felt her heart beat faster, but not from fear for her father-in-law, but from something else. A mixture of anxiety and relief? She quickly suppressed the thought. "Oh my God," she muttered aloud, feigning horror. Is he alive?" "I don't know. There's no word yet. The plane disappeared from radar 2 hours ago." "I'll be right over," Lynette said, already mentally canceling the day's remaining treatments. They met at the house a half hour later. Corbin paced the living room from corner to corner, stopping occasionally at the phone as if waiting for an important call. Lynette sat on the couch, nervously running her fingers over the edge of the pillow. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Wait," Corbin replied. "The Coast Guard promised to call as soon as there was news." They waited until evening. Corbin called several times himself, but there was little information. The search continued, no wreckage yet found. With each passing hour, the hope of finding his father alive became more and more elusive. "Maybe he ejected in time," Lynette suggested without much conviction in her voice. "His plane doesn't have ejection seats," Corbin replied. "It's not a military fighter jet." Around 9 p.m., Corbin called several of his father's friends, informing them of the incident. Their reactions were predictable: shock, offers of help, words of encouragement. Corbin portrayed a grief-stricken son, thanking them for their participation, asking for prayers that Wayne would be found alive. After the last call, he hung up and looked at his wife. They were sitting in the half-dark living room, lit only by a desk lamp in the corner. Night had fallen outside the window and the house seemed especially quiet. "Lynette," Corbin began cautiously, "we need to prepare for the worst. Do you think It's been 10 hours. If he was alive, they would have found him by now." Lynette nodded, and something resembling relief flashed in her eyes for the first time all day. She quickly covered that expression with a mask of sadness, but Corbin had time to notice. "So we have to think of practical things," he said. "What kind of things?" Corbin got up from the couch and walked over to the window, looking out at the dark street. "About the funeral if a body is found. About the will. About the company? What about the company?" "It's passing to me. Dad made the will 3 years ago. I've seen the paperwork." Lynette got up from the couch and walked over to her husband. "And what are we going to do with it?" "Sell it," Corbin answered without hesitation. "You remember what the realtor said about the value of the lot, don't you? $8 million just for the land under the hangar, plus the equipment, plus the company's reputation. How much total? Corbin turned to his wife, a gambling gleam burning in his eyes. About 10 million, maybe a little more. They stood at the window embraced, and for the first time all day Lynette felt she could allow herself to smile. Of course she would miss Wayne. He wasn't a bad man, unlike many men of his generation. But she couldn't deny the relief she felt at the thought of no longer having to listen to his comments on their lifestyle and spending. "We need to be careful," Corbin said. "People will be watching our reaction. We have to look grief-stricken." "Of course," Lynette agreed. "But at home, between us—" "At home we can afford honesty," Corbin finished. The next morning they awoke to the ringing of the phone. Corbin grabbed the receiver, expecting to hear news from the Coast Guard, but it was a neighbor calling, offering condolences. News of the missing airplane had already spread through the city. Throughout the day, the calls were numerous. Father's friends, business associates, even the mayor of the city personally expressed sympathy and assured that the search would continue until at least the wreckage of the plane was found. Corbin and Lynette took on the roles of grieving relatives with professional skill. Lynette even wept during a conversation with the wife of one of her father's friends, talking about what a wonderful man Wayne was and how she hoped for a miracle. But in between those calls and visits, left alone, they discussed other things. "I spoke to Roger Falconer today," Corbin reported over lunch. "He's the buyer who was interested in the lot. And what did he say? That he'd be willing to consider buying the whole complex, the land, the hangar, the equipment, but only after the inheritance issue is officially resolved." Lynette nodded, cutting the salad on her plate. "And how long will that take? If Dad is officially declared dead, 2 or 3 months for the paperwork. If they find the body, even faster. And the insurance? 10 million. It pays out in the event of death or missing persons." Lynette set her fork aside and looked at her husband. "So we get about 20 million total?" "About that. Probably a little less after taxes and legal expenses." They sat in the sunlit dining room, planning for a future without Wayne Aldridge. Corbin was already mentally figuring out where to spend the money. A new oceanfront home, perhaps in California, traveling they'd dreamed of for years, investing in more promising projects. "What are we going to tell people about selling the company?" asked Lynette. "That I won't be able to continue my father's business. The memories are too hard, the business too dangerous. People will understand." Lynette nodded. It sounded reasonable and plausible. That evening, they dined at an expensive restaurant. The first time in many months they'd allowed themselves such luxury without feeling guilty in front of Vane, who thought their spending was excessive. Corbin ordered a bottle of expensive wine, which they drank almost entirely. "You know," Lynette said as they drove home, "I feel terrible about not having more grief." "Don't feel guilty," Corbin replied, driving the car through the dark city streets. "Dad lived a full life. He did what he loved until the very end. In a way, it's the best way to go. But we should have loved him more. We loved him in our own way, but he made us that way himself. With his constant remarks, his criticism of our way of life, his unwillingness to realize that the world had changed." Corbin did not add that what irritated him most was his father's stubbornness about money. Wayne could have afforded a more comfortable life, could have bought a new house, an expensive car, could have traveled as a family. But no, he preferred to save up his money and spend it only on his airplanes. At home, they sat on the couch watching the television news. The local news mentioned the search for the missing airplane and showed footage of Coast Guard helicopters patrolling the wooded area north of town. The announcer reported that the pilot, 74-year-old Wayne Aldridge, owner of a local aircraft company, had not yet been found. "We'll have to go to the police tomorrow," Corbin said. "Give a formal statement, sign some paperwork. And then we wait, and we get ready for our new life." Lynette snuggled up to her husband, and they sat in silence, listening to the sound of the surf outside the window. In a few days, when the search was officially over, a new chapter of their lives would begin. A chapter without Wayne Aldridge, his criticisms and constant reminders that money should be earned, not spent. 3 days after the plane disappeared, the Coast Guard officially announced the discovery of the wreckage. Corbin received the call on a morning while having breakfast with his wife in their cozy sunlit kitchen. A Coast Guard officer reported that the remains of the aircraft had been found in a wooded area 20 kilometers north of Bethany Beach. "And my father's body?" asked Corbin, trying to sound the proper alarm in his voice. "No discovery yet, sir. We're continuing our search, but I must warn you, the airplane is badly wrecked. If your father was in the cockpit at the time of impact..." Corbin took the hint without further explanation. "Understood. Thank you for the information." After finishing his conversation, he turned to Lynette, who was watching his face intently, trying to read the news from the expression in his eyes. "Found the wreckage," he reported. "No body yet, but the plane is completely destroyed." Lynette set her cup of coffee on the table and nodded. "So there's no chance?" "None. They'll search for a few more days, for formality's sake, but the outcome is obvious." They finished breakfast in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. Corbin was already mentally compiling a list of things to do in the coming weeks. Lynette was thinking about the fact that for the first time in her years of marriage, she would be able to buy the things she dreamed of without having to listen to lectures on prudent saving from her father-in-law. By noon, condolence people began to arrive. The first to arrive was Mrs. Cairnwell, a neighbor who had lived across the street for 30 years and considered herself almost a member of the family. She brought a casserole and talked at length about what a wonderful man Wayne was and how much she would miss him. "He always said hello when he saw me in the garden." She wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. "So polite, such a hard worker, and at his age still flying those airplanes." Corbin nodded at appropriate points and thanked her for the kind words, portraying restrained sorrow. Lynette sat beside him, occasionally putting a handkerchief to her eyes, though there were no tears there. After Mrs. Cairnwell came Davis and Rowena Blackthorne, old friends of Wayne's from his days in the Army. Davis was retired, like his late father, and they often met to play chess or discuss politics. Rowena brought flowers and offered to help organize the memorial service. "We can't believe he's gone," she said, holding Lynette's hand tightly. As recently as last week, Davis was playing chess with him, and Wayne looked so energetic. "He's always been energetic," Corbin agreed. "Perhaps too energetic for his age." Davis frowned. "Do you think age caused the disaster?" "I don't know," Corbin answered cautiously. "But we warned him it was time to stop test flying." Rowena shook her head. "He would never have listened. Aviation was his life." After the Blackthorns left, Corbin and Lynette were alone, but not for long. A string of visitors stretched out all day. Corbin's business colleagues, his father's clients from the aviation company, neighbors, acquaintances. Everyone had to be greeted, offered condolences, thanked for their participation. By late afternoon, Lynette was tired of having to constantly control her facial expression. Her cheeks ached from forced, sad smiles. Her eyes watered from having to fake crying. When the last visitor left, she collapsed on the living room couch and rubbed her face with the palms of her hands. "I can't take it anymore," she said. "How long do we have to play this act out?" "Until the funeral," Corbin replied, loosening his tie. "And then a few more weeks until things calm down." "And when's the funeral?" "As soon as they find the body. Or in a week if they don't. Can't drag it out too long." The next day, Corbin drove downtown to meet Roger Falconer. They set up a meeting at a cafe on Main Street, away from prying eyes. Falconer was a Miami real estate developer who had been eyeing lots in Bethany Beach for a new apartment complex for several years. Falconer appeared to be a middle-aged man with carefully styled graying hair and an expensive suit. He expressed his condolences quite sincerely, but quickly got to the point. "First of all, let me express my sympathy for the loss of my father," he began, stirring his coffee with a silver spoon. "I realize this is a difficult time for your family." "Thank you," nodded Corbin. "It is indeed a great loss. Still, life goes on, and sooner or later the question of what to do with the inheritance comes up." Falconer leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I know this may seem untimely, but my suggestion is still valid." Corbin paused, portraying an internal struggle between grief and practical considerations. "You see, Roger, the airplane company was my father's life's work. Selling it..." "I understand your feelings," Falconer interrupted, "but let's be realistic. You're a real estate professional, not an aircraft engineer. Will you be able to carry on your father's business?" "Probably not," Corbin admitted after a pause. "I don't have the proper knowledge. Then the site would just sit empty. In the meantime, it has enormous potential for development. We're planning to build a luxury apartment complex there overlooking the ocean. It will benefit the entire city. Falconer pulled a file folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. I'm prepared to offer $12 million for the entire complex. Land, buildings, equipment, company goodwill. Corbin tried not to show how impressed he was with the amount. $12 million was more than he'd expected. That's a serious offer, he said slowly, but I need time to think about it. Of course, the offer is valid for a month, but I must warn you, if you refuse, I'll consider other sites. After the meeting, Corbin drove home in high spirits. $12 million plus $10 million in insurance equaled $22 million. After taxes and expenses, they would have about $18 million left. More than he had dreamed of making in his entire real estate career. At home, he told Lynette about the meeting. She listened with her eyes wide open. And when he named the amount, she even whistled. 18 million, she repeated. My God, Corbin. We'll be able to buy that house in California we've been dreaming of, and a yacht, and travel all over the world. Don't get ahead of yourself, Corbin warned, though he was already mentally calculating what kind of house they could afford. We have to wait for the inheritance to be processed first. Lynette spent the rest of the day on the internet, perusing luxury real estate sites in California and the Bahamas. She bookmarked pages with homes priced from $3 to $5 million, imagining how she would live in a mansion with a pool and an ocean view. Corbin wasn't idling either. He was researching investment opportunities, looking at capital allocation options to ensure a steady income for years to come. If properly managed, 18 million could provide them with a very comfortable life for the rest of their days. That evening, they received a call from St. Mark's Hospital in a neighboring town. A woman's voice reported that a patient found at the scene of a plane crash had been admitted and asked for confirmation of identity. Corbin frowned. What patient? My father? We can't confirm identity over the phone, sir, but the patient was found to have identification in the name of Wayne Aldridge. Could you come in for identification? Corbin exchanged a look with his wife. It was impossible. The airplane was completely destroyed. Surviving such a crash was unrealistic. What condition is he in? Asked Corbin. Critical, sir. He's in intensive care unconscious. The doctors are fighting for his life, but the prognosis is uncertain. After the conversation, Corbin and Lynette sat on the couch in stunned silence. If their father really was alive, all their plans were falling apart overnight. Maybe it's a mistake, suggested Lynette in a weak voice. Maybe the documents belong to someone else. Maybe, Corbin agreed, but in his heart he knew it was unlikely. Are you going to the hospital? Corbin was silent for a long time, weighing his options. If his father was alive but in critical condition, there was a chance he wouldn't survive. And if he did survive, he would need long treatment and care, which was also not conducive to their plans. Tomorrow, he finally said. I'll go tomorrow. But tomorrow turned into the day after tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow turned into the next week. Each time, Corbin found reasons to postpone the trip to the hospital. There was an important meeting with a client, or the need to deal with probate paperwork, or Lynette not feeling well. The doctor said he was unconscious, he justified to his wife and himself. What does it matter if I come today or in a few days? He won't recognize me anyway. Lynette agreed. She didn't want to go to the hospital either and see her father-in-law mutilated and hooked up to life support machines. It would only upset her and prevent her from enjoying the anticipation of her new life. Meanwhile, they continued to accept condolences and prepare for the memorial service. Corbin ordered a memorial dinner at the best restaurant in town, and Lynette picked out a matching black dress. They even ordered wreaths and wrote an obituary for the local paper, calling Wayne a loving father and grandfather, a dedicated aircraft designer and patriot. The only thing that marred their plans were periodic calls from the hospital. Doctors asked when the relatives would arrive, informed about the patient's condition, asked to bring personal belongings of the patient. Corbin answered evasively, promised to come in the next few days, and quickly ended the conversations. Maybe we should go after all, Lynette suggested after another call, if only to get them to leave us alone. Why? Corbin shrugged. If he dies, we'll be notified. If he survives, well, then we'll decide what to do next. They never went to the hospital. Instead, Lynette went shopping, selecting furniture for their future home in California, and Corbin met with lawyers to discuss the details of probate. Life without Wayne Aldridge seemed much more appealing to them than life with him, and they were willing to do anything to get that new life started as soon as possible. My consciousness came back to me gradually, as if I were surfacing from a deep, dark well. First came sounds, the quiet whirring of the machines, footsteps in the corridor, the muffled voices of the nurses. Then the smells, antiseptic, medicine, the distinctive hospital aroma that could not be confused with anything else. And only then the pain, sharp, piercing, spreading through my body in waves. My eyelids felt incredibly heavy. I tried to open them several times, but my muscles wouldn't listen. My throat was dry as a desert, my tongue sticking to my palate. When I tried to move my arms, I realized there were some tubes and wires attached to them. "He's coming around," I heard a woman's voice somewhere to my right. Finally, I managed to open my eyes. A nurse in a white coat was leaning over me, a young woman with a kind face and attentive brown eyes. Behind her, I could see the white walls of the room, the medical equipment, the window with the curtains drawn. "Mr. Aldridge?" The nurse gently touched my shoulder. "Can you hear me?" I tried to answer, but only a wheeze escaped my throat. The nurse brought a glass of water and a straw to my lips. The water was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. "Where, me?" I wheezed after a few sips. "At St. Mark's Hospital," she replied. "You were in a plane crash. You were found in the woods and brought here 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks, so I'd been unconscious for 3 whole weeks. My memories of the crash were vague and fragmented. Engine failure, falling, hitting the trees. Everything else was lost in a fog. How's my condition?" "Serious injuries, but you're on the road to recovery." The nurse checked the gauges next to the bed. "Fractured ribs, broken leg, concussion, but most importantly, you're alive. It's almost a miracle." She left the room, promising to bring a doctor. I was left alone, trying to piece together the shards of memory. Slowly, my mind began to clear. The test flight, the new engine, the system failure, the crash in the woods, and then nothing. A void until that moment. The doctor who came in a few minutes later was an older man with a gray beard and tired eyes. He performed an examination, checked his reflexes, asked a few questions about his well-being. "You're very lucky, Mr. Aldridge," he said, writing something down in the medical chart. "With injuries like this, many people don't survive. Your body fought for life with enviable tenacity." "And my family? Do they know I'm alive?" The doctor hesitated for a moment, exchanging a glance with the nurse. "We contacted your son right after you were delivered, reported that you were alive, though in critical condition." "And what did he say?" "He promised to come for a lineup, but—" The doctor hesitated again. "But?" "Mr. Aldridge, no one has visited you in 3 weeks. We called several times, but your son found reasons each time to postpone the visit." Those words struck me harder than the physical pain of my injuries. I'd been lying here for 3 weeks between life and death, and Corbin had never once come to check on me. Not even Lynette, who always portrayed a caring daughter-in-law. "Perhaps they're very busy," the doctor suggested, clearly trying to come up with an explanation, "or are afraid to see you in this condition." But I knew it wasn't about busyness or fear. It was about them being more comfortable with thinking I was dead. A nurse named Caroline, as I found out later, turned out to be a very talkative woman. Over the next few days, she told me news of the town that she had heard from other patients and visitors. It was from her that I learned the details of what was happening while I was fighting for life in the ICU. "Your son is regularly interviewed by the local newspaper about the search for your body," she reported during the evening shift. "Very movingly, he talks about how much he misses his father and how he hopes to find the remains for a decent burial." I listened, unable to believe my ears. Corbin was giving an interview about the search for my body, while knowing that I was lying in the hospital alive, albeit injured. "And I also heard from Mrs. Fenton in Ward 3 that the town has already started raising money for a memorial," Caroline continued. "Your sister-in-law is heading the committee. They say they plan to erect it in Central Park." A monument. They're raising money for a monument to a man who lies in a hospital 20 kilometers from their home. On the 4th day after waking up, I felt strong enough to ask for a phone to be brought to me. Caroline brought a machine on wheels and helped me dial the house. The phone rang for a long time before Lynette picked up. Hello? Her voice sounded distracted, like she was preoccupied with something. Lynette, it's me. There was a long pause, so long that I wondered if the connection had been cut. Wayne, she finally whispered, and in her voice I heard not joy, but something akin to terror. Yes, it's me. I'm alive, Lynette. I've been lying in St. Mark's Hospital for 3 weeks now. There was a pause again. Then I heard her cover the receiver with her hand and say something to someone, probably Corbin. It was impossible to make out the words, but the tone betrayed panic. Oh my God, Wayne, she turned back to the phone. We thought you were dead. Found the wreckage of an airplane. The hospital called you. The doctor told me about it. Yes, they did, but we thought it was a mistake, that the paperwork had gotten to the wrong person. A lie, I could hear it in her voice. They knew I was alive, but they chose to pretend they didn't know. Where's Corbin? He's at work, taking care of company business. Very worried. Tell him I'm alive and I want to see him. Of course I will. We'll be there soon as we can. But they didn't come that day or the next. I didn't call home again. Instead, I asked Caroline to bring me the local paper. On the third page was a large article with the headline, Airplane Designer's Family Doesn't Give Up Hope. In the article, Corbin talked about how difficult it was to process his father's disappearance and how he hoped to find a body for a proper burial. There was even a photo of him, standing next to the wreckage of my plane in the woods, portraying an inconsolable son. Dad was my whole life, the newspaper quoted him as saying. Aviation was his passion, and he died doing what he loved. We will continue the search until we find his remains. Reading that, I felt something cold and fierce rise up inside me. Corbin wasn't just ignoring the fact that I was alive. He was actively using my supposed death for his own purposes. The next day, I asked the doctor to allow me to use the phone without restriction. Officially, it was to take care of business matters, but in reality, I wanted to understand exactly what was going on with my company and property. The first call I made was to the bank where I had my main account. After introducing myself and giving all the necessary details, I asked for the latest transactions on the account. Mr. Aldridge, the bank employee's voice sounded surprised. It's good to hear from you. We received a copy of the death certificate from your son 2 weeks ago. Death certificate. Corbin had somehow obtained the official document of my death and provided it to the bank. What transactions have been made on the account in the last 3 weeks? I asked, trying to remain calm. Your son, as the heir, has initiated asset freeze proceedings until the inheritance issues are resolved. Requests have also been made for insurance payments. So Corbin's already started probate proceedings. He froze my accounts and made requests for insurance payments with a forged death certificate in hand. The next call I made was to the insurance company. There I was told about the same thing. The notification of the death of the insured person was received. The procedure of payment of $10 million to the heirs was started. The last call was the most painful. I called the office of my airline company. The receiver was picked up by a secretary, Jenny, who had worked for me for 8 years. Mr. Aldridge? Her voice was full of amazement. But I'm alive, Jenny. Lying in the hospital, but alive. What's going on with the company? Your son told us that the company is temporarily shutting down due to your death. He laid off all employees 2 weeks ago. Fired all the employees. People who worked with me for years, who helped build the company, who depended on this job. And the equipment? It's being appraised by buyers. Your son said he'll be selling all the company's assets. I hung up the phone and closed my eyes, trying to digest what I'd heard. In the 3 weeks I'd been fighting for my life, Corbin had managed to get a fake death certificate for me, freeze my bank accounts, file for an insurance payout, fire everyone in the company, and start selling the property. Caroline entered the room just as I was trying to realize the magnitude of the betrayal. Mr. Aldridge, are you all right? You look very pale. Caroline, I said slowly, do you happen to know how we can get phone records? She raised her eyebrows in surprise. Phone records? Why would you want that? I didn't answer her question, but in the back of my mind I was already maturing a plan. If Corbin thinks I'm dead, he won't be careful about phone calls, which meant I'd be able to hear his true motives with my own ears. The next day, when Caroline left for her lunch break, it was with great difficulty that I made my way to the nightstand where the phone was, dialed the house number and prepared to wait. Corbin was home and on the other phone. I could hear his voice through the thin walls of the house. He and Lynette obviously didn't expect anyone to overhear them. "Yes, Roger. Everything is going according to plan," Corbin was saying. "The death certificate has been processed. The probate matters are almost finalized. I think we'll be able to sign the sale contract in a month." A pause during which the interviewer spoke. "No, there won't be any problems," Corbin continued. "Nobody knows the old man is alive. The doctors at the hospital think we just can't get over the loss. And he won't be there long. The injuries are too severe." Another pause. "Of course, I understand your doubts. But believe me, there is no risk. Even if he survives, which is unlikely, he'll be disabled. Won't be able to run the company's affairs. And by then, all the paperwork will be done." I listened, feeling cold rage spill through my veins. My own son was discussing my death as a business transaction, planning the sale of my life's work and hoping I wouldn't live to prevent him. "12 million for the company, plus 10 million in insurance," Corbin continued. "22 million, Roger. We can start a new life." The last straw was Lynette's laughter in the background. "Dad's plane crashed. Finally, we can sell everything," I heard her say, and my heart almost stopped. They were celebrating. My son and daughter-in-law were celebrating my presumed death and making plans for the future, swimming in the money they hoped to get from my demise. I carefully hung up the phone and leaned back on the pillows. Now I knew exactly what I was worth in the eyes of my family. Not a father, not a man, but an obstacle to the wealth they thought was rightfully theirs. But they were wrong about one thing. I was alive, and I was going to fight. For my company, for my employees, for justice. And they would find out in the most painful way possible. Getting out of the hospital was easier than I thought it would be. The doctors still insisted that I needed at least 2 more weeks of hospitalization, but I was adamant. The fractures had healed well enough for me to get around with a cane, and the concussion was no longer plaguing me with constant headaches. "Mr. Aldridge, I strongly recommend you stay." Dr. Harrison tried one last time to change my mind as I signed the discharge papers. "Your condition is stable, but not yet fully recovered." "Doctor, I understand your concern," I replied, buttoning up the shirt that the kind-hearted Caroline had brought from my house. "But there are some cases that can't wait." He shook his head but didn't insist, probably used to the stubbornness of patients in his years of practice. Caroline helped me to the exit, still trying to talk me out of being discharged prematurely. "What about your family?" she asked when we stopped at the hospital entrance. "It's not like they never came to visit you." "My family will see me very soon," I replied, hailing a cab. I asked the driver to take me not to my house, but to an old friend, Davis Blackthorne, who lived a few blocks away. Davis was one of the few people I trusted completely, and if anyone could help me in this situation, it was him. When the cab stopped outside the Blackthorne house, I saw Davis in the garden. He was watering the roses with a hose, humming something to himself. When he heard the sound of the car door slamming shut, he turned around, and the watering can fell out of his hands. "Christ almighty," he whispered, looking at me like I was a ghost. "Wayne, is that really you?" "In person," I replied, leaning on my cane and slowly approaching the wicket. Davis rushed toward me, nearly falling onto the water-wet walkway. "But how? We thought, Corbin said," he stammered, unable to string words together into meaningful sentences. "Corbin said a lot of things," I said dryly. "Not all of it was true." Davis helped me into the house, where his wife Rowena came out to the commotion. Her reaction was even more violent. She splayed her hands, clutched at her heart, and nearly fainted. "Wayne Aldridge!" she exclaimed when she came to her senses. "What on earth is going on?" "We were at Corbin's last week offering condolences." "Sit down, both of you," I said, settling into a familiar chair in their living room. "I'll tell you what's been going on these past 3 weeks." I spent the next hour telling Davis and Rowena in detail about the disaster, about spending weeks in the hospital between life and death, about what I'd learned about my family's behavior. They listened with growing amazement and indignation. "No way," Rowena shook her head. "Corbin couldn't have done that. He's your son." "That's why this is particularly painful," I replied, "but the facts speak for themselves." Davis was silent, but I could see his mind working. He was a retired military man, used to analyzing situations and making quick decisions. "What do you plan to do?" he asked finally. "First, I want to see with my own eyes what's going on in my house. But I need help." "What kind of help?" "Lend me your car and help me get home unnoticed." Davis nodded without hesitation. "Sure, but be careful, Vane. If they really are as you describe, then they're capable of a lot of things," I finished. "I understand." We waited until evening. Davis drove me to my house in his car, parking in the alley behind the lot. I knew every bush in my garden, every lane, every hiding place. Getting to the house unnoticed was not difficult, despite my cane and some uncertainty in my movements. The house was brightly lighted. There were lights in all the windows, which was unusual. Corbin and Lynette usually saved on electricity by constantly turning off unnecessary bulbs. Today the house was lit up like a Christmas tree. I crept to the living room window and peered cautiously inside. What I saw was beyond my expectations. A festive table was set in the living room with expensive wines, delicacies, and flowers in vases. Corbin and Lynette were seated at the table in smart clothes, raising their glasses in some sort of solemn toast. I scooted closer to the window, trying to hear their words. "To a new life," said Corbin, raising a glass of champagne. "To being free at last." "To $22 million, added Lynette, laughing and clinking glasses with her husband. They were drinking expensive champagne, celebrating my death and the inheritance they were about to receive. On the coffee table I saw papers, folders, some photos spread out. "Show me the plans for the house in California again," Lynette asked, and Corbin pulled glossy real estate brochures from a folder. "This mansion in Malibu," he pointed to a photo of a luxurious home overlooking the ocean. 5 bedrooms, 7 baths, pool, tennis court, 4 whole $2 million. "And this one?" Lynette pointed to another photo. "A house in the Bahamas, $3.8 million. But it's got its own beach and a dock for a yacht." They were looking at pictures of the houses they were going to buy with my money, discussing the details of their future lives of luxury. Lynette showed her husband pictures of expensive cars, jewelry, yachts. "What about this house?" she asked, circling the living room. "We'll sell it," Corbin answered without hesitation. "Roger Falconer is interested not only in the company lot, but also in this property. Says there are several other villas that could be built here. It's a shame to part with memories." Lynette didn't seem particularly upset. "What memories?" Corbin grinned. "Dad's constant lectures on how to spend money properly? His disgruntled looks when we bought something decent? No, Lynette, stop living in the old man's shadow." I gritted my teeth as I listened to my son respond to my attempts to teach them how to be smart about money. "Speaking of Daddy's money," Lynette pulled some sort of document out of her purse. "I was at the bank today. The manager confirmed that all the accounts are frozen correctly. As soon as the court officially declares him dead, the money will go to us. And the insurance company. Also in the process, the agent said the payout will be made within a month after all the paperwork is received." Corbin nodded and pulled some folded papers from an inside pocket of his jacket. "Now, this is the interesting part." He unfolded the papers on the table, and I could see it was some kind of contract. "A preliminary agreement with Falconer," Corbin explained to his wife. $12 million for the company, the site, and all the equipment. I signed it today." Lynette splashed her hands. "Signed it already? Without me?" "It's only a preliminary agreement. We'll sign the main contract together when all the inheritance stuff is done." So Corbin had already sold my company, the business I'd spent 30 years building, the people who depended on that work, the airplanes that could save lives, all of it he'd sold for $12 million to a developer who would build houses for the rich on the site. "What are we going to tell people?" asked Lynette. "A lot of people knew Daddy loved his company." "We'll tell the truth," replied Corbin, "that it's too painful a memory, that I can't continue in the business that killed my father." Killed my father. He spoke of my airline company as something deadly, even though it was the first serious accident in 30 years of business. Lynette got up from the table and walked to the window. For a moment I was afraid she'd notice me, but she wasn't looking at the garden, but at her reflection in the glass, fixing her hair. "You know what makes me happiest?" she said, walking back to the table. "What?" "That I won't have to listen to him lecture anymore. Remember how indignant he was when I bought that dress?" She ran her hand over the expensive black dress I now realized she'd bought specifically for my funeral. "Or when you criticized my car," Corbin added. said such spending was unwise for people our age. And now we'll be able to buy whatever we want. New cars, clothes, jewelry. Lynette's eyes burned with a greedy gleam. Travel all over the world, Corbin picked up. First class in the best hotels. They daydreamed aloud about how they would spend the money from my death. Every word they said was like a stabbing blow. I'd raised my son, educated him, helped him all his life, and he'd rejoiced at my death because it gave him access to money. By the way, Corbin suddenly grew serious, the hospital isn't calling anymore. I think they've realized we're not going to make it. What if he survives? There was alarm in Lynette's voice. He won't survive, Corbin replied confidently. The doctor hinted that the injuries are very serious, and even if by some miracle he survives, he'll be disabled. Won't be able to run the company or challenge our actions. Are you sure? Absolutely. By the time he comes to his senses, if at all the paperwork will be done. The money has been transferred to our accounts. The company sold. Corbin spoke of my possible disability with such indifference as if it were an old car breaking down. What if he tries to do something about it? What can he do about it? Corbin laughed. He's officially dead. I made sure all the paperwork was done correctly. Even if he shows up, it'll take time to prove his identity, to cancel the death certificate, to regain title to the property. And by then we'll be long gone from here, Lynette finished. Exactly. In California or the Bahamas. Let him try to get us. They planned not just to steal my inheritance, but to abscond with the money so I couldn't find it. Corbin had thought of everything in detail. Every step of their plan had been meticulously detailed. Lynette stood up and walked over to the bar in the corner of the living room. She pulled out a bottle of expensive cognac that I kept for special occasions and poured 2 large glasses. To Dad, she said with mocking solemnity. Here's to him finally doing something useful for us. To Dad, Corbin agreed, raising his glass. Thank you, old man, for crashing at just the right time. They laughed and drank my brandy, toasting my death. That was the last straw. I couldn't listen to their cynicism and cruelty any longer. Stepping away from the window, I quietly made my way to the back door of the house. I still had my key, and the door opened without a problem. I made my way through the kitchen to the living room, trying not to make any noise. Corbin and Lynette were too busy celebrating to notice the quiet footsteps in the hallway. Stopping in the doorway to the living room, I watched them for a few seconds. They were sitting with their backs to me, looking at some catalogs of expensive goods. On the table in front of them were documents for the sale of my company, bank papers, insurance policies, all the documentation that should have ensured them a trouble-free future with my money. $22 million, Corbin repeated, looking over the numbers in the documents. Even after taxes, we'll have about 18 million left. More than we could have earned in a lifetime, Lynette added. More than we'd earn working honestly, Corbin agreed. They talked about honesty by planning to steal the inheritance of a man they thought was dead. About honesty by forging death papers. About honesty, leaving their dying father in the hospital without help or support. I took a step into the living room, and the floorboard under my foot creaked. Corbin and Lynette turned to the door at the same time. What they saw made them freeze with their mouths open. Corbin had gone so pale he was almost white. The glass fell out of Lynette's hands and shattered on the floor, spattering cognac all over the expensive carpet. For a few seconds we stared at each other in complete silence. I stood in the living room doorway, leaning on my cane, alive and well, but immensely tired from what I had learned about my family. They were sitting at the holiday table, surrounded by the papers from the sale of my estate, with the remnants of the gala dinner they'd hosted in honor of my death. Hello, I said quietly. I hope I'm not interrupting the celebration. The silence in the living room lasted indefinitely. Corbin sat motionless, staring at me as if he saw a ghost. His face took on an unhealthy gray hue, and his hands trembled as he slowly placed his glass on the table. Lynette pressed her palms to her lips, trying to hold back the scream that seemed ready to burst from her throat. I entered the parlor slowly, leaning on my cane, and stopped at their festive table. My eyes slid over the documents spread out: company sales contracts, bank statements, insurance policies, real estate catalogs in California. My whole life turned into numbers on paper. Dad, Corbin finally squeezed out, voice shaking. You're, like, We thought that I was dead, I finished for him. Yeah, I noticed. Judging by the setting, you not only thought it, but you actively believed it. Lynette tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She sank back into the chair, keeping her eyes widened with terror. The hospital called, she whispered. They said you were in critical condition. We thought, the doctors said, the doctors said I'd survive, I interrupted calmly, and that my family showed no interest in my condition. 3 weeks, Lynette. 3 weeks I lay between life and death, and you never came once. We wanted to. Corbin finally recovered enough to try to justify himself. But the doctors said you were unconscious. We thought there was no point. No point in visiting your dying father? I moved closer to the table, looking at the documents. There was a point in getting a fake death certificate for me, though. Corbin jerked as if he'd been punched. It's not. I didn't. Don't lie to me, son, steel rang in my voice. The bank informed me of the death certificate you provided them. The insurance company got a copy, too. I picked up one of the documents from the desk, the preliminary agreement to sell the airline company. Falconer was offering $12 million for my life's work. What's this? I asked, showing the contract. Dad, I can explain. Corbin stood up from his chair, holding out his hands in a pleading gesture. We really thought you were dead. When they found the wreckage of the plane, the wreckage was found. And my body, it wasn't there, but you decided not to wait and started dividing the inheritance. I put the contract back on the table, sold my company, fired people who had worked with me for years. Lynette finally found the strength to stand up. She walked over to me, holding out her arms, and the tears in her eyes looked almost genuine. Wayne, honey, you don't understand. Her voice shook. We've been so worried. Corbin was up nights, blaming himself for not being able to talk you out of flying. Worried, I repeated thoughtfully. And what's with the holiday table? What's with the expensive champagne and brandy? Were you celebrating my death? No, exclaimed Lynette. It's not what you think. We were trying to support each other in our grief. I looked at her with undisguised disgust. Support each other? By looking at $4 million real estate catalogs? Corbin tried to walk toward me, but I stopped him with a gesture. Don't come near me, I said coldly. I heard your conversation at the window, heard you toasting my death, heard you thank me for crashing at an opportune moment. Corbin's face turned ashy. He realized it was pointless to deny what he had heard. Dad, you have to understand. He tried to find an explanation. All these years we've felt limited. You were always criticizing our spending, saying we were living beyond our means. Because you really were living beyond your means, I replied. Corbin made $40,000 a year and spent $70,000. Lynette spent more on clothes and cosmetics than many families spend on food. But we had opportunities, Lynette splashed her hands. You could have afforded us a better life, but you preferred to save money like a cheapskate. Like a cheapskate? I laughed, but the laugh came out bitter. I worked from morning to night to build the company, put every dollar into growing the business, and you wanted to spend that money on luxuries. On a normal life, objected Corbin. On what people of our social standing can afford. Your social standing? I went to the window and looked out at my garden, which remembered every tree, every path. Corbin, you're a real estate salesman in a small town. Lynette does manicures in a beauty parlor. What's your social standing? Corbin blushed with anger and humiliation. We deserve better. We deserve a better life. Deserve? I turned to them. Based on what? What have you done to deserve millions of dollars? We're your family, Lynette whispered. Your blood. My blood, I repeated slowly. Yes, Corbin is my son. I gave him life, raised him, paid for his education, helped him start his career. And in return, I got a son who celebrates my death and steals my inheritance. We didn't steal, exclaimed Corbin. By law, I am your sole heir. By law, one inherits after the death of the testator, I replied, and I, as you see, am alive. What's more, I'm of sound mind and good memory. I took out of my pocket the papers I had prepared while still in the hospital with the help of a lawyer who had come at my request. This is the new will, I announced. According to it, you, Corbin, and you, Lynette, forfeit all rights to my inheritance. Corbin clutched his chest like he was having a heart attack. You can't. I'm your son. You're my son only biologically, I replied calmly. But a son who wishes his father dead for money is not worthy of an inheritance. Lynette rushed to me and fell to her knees, grabbing my hands. Wayne, please, we can fix this. We'll cancel all the contracts. We'll get the money back. We'll be good. I released my hands from her grip. Lynette, you're 43 years old. It's a little late to learn how to be good. But we're family, she sobbed. Family is supposed to forgive. A family is supposed to love, I replied. And you only love my money. Corbin stood up and started pacing around the room, waving his arms. All right, let's say you're right. Let's say we were really wrong. But what now? You want to leave us with nothing? Nothing? I looked at him surprised. You have a job. Lynette has a beauty parlor. You have the house you bought with my money, the cars I helped buy. You won't be left with nothing. But the company remains mine, and I'll cancel all the contracts you signed without my consent. Falconer won't agree, Corbin tried to threaten. We've already taken the deposit. What deposit? Corbin faltered, realizing he'd blurted it out. $1 million, he whispered, as a pledge of seriousness. So they'd already spent $1 million of my money. I wondered exactly what it was for. Where is that money? I asked. We made some purchases, Lynette admitted. Thought we were about to get a large sum of money. What kind of shopping? She pointed to her dress, to expensive jewelry I hadn't seen on her before. Clothes, jewelry. We made a down payment on a house in California. A house in California? I couldn't believe the audacity of it. You already bought a house with my money? Just the down payment, Corbin said hastily. $500,000. The rest was supposed to come in after the probate was processed. $500,000. $500,000 for the house they were going to live in after I died. Fine, I said. Then you have 30 days to pay back all the money you spent. How can we get it back? Exclaimed Corbin. We can't cancel the contract with the developer. That's your problem, I replied indifferently. Sell your cars, mortgage your house, borrow from your friends. I'm not interested in how you do it. And if we can't, then I'll sue you for fraud and embezzlement. Corbin and Lynette exchanged desperate looks. They realized they were trapped in their own greed. Dad, Corbin tried to change his tone, to make it softer and more pleading. We did make a mistake. We did wrong. But you can fix things, can't you? Some things can't be fixed, I replied. Trust, for example. Love. Respect. We've always loved you. You loved my money. The difference is substantial. I walked over to the couch and sank down heavily on it, feeling the fatigue from the emotions I had experienced come over me in a wave. I put the cane down next to me. You have a week, I said calmly. A week to move out of my house. This is our house, exclaimed Lynette. We've lived here for 5 years. This house is in my name. You lived here because I authorized it. Now the permission is revoked. But where are we going to go? Get an apartment, buy a smaller house, live within your means. Corbin sat on the edge of the chair, putting his head in his hands. You're ruining our lives, he muttered. I'm destroying your illusions, I corrected. Your life, you ruined yourself when you decided you were entitled to something you didn't earn. And your company? Asked Lynette in a weak voice. What will happen to it? The company will go on. I'll bring back all the laid-off employees, cancel the sale, and continue to grow the business. And the inheritance. My inheritance will go to people who deserve it. Perhaps I'll set up a charitable foundation. Perhaps I'll leave money to the employees of the company who helped me build it. Corbin lifted his head and looked at me with despair. You can't leave us with no inheritance at all. I'm your only son. The only biological descendant, I agreed, but you stopped being a son the moment you started rejoicing in my death. Silence hung in the room again. Corbin and Lynette sat as if struck by thunder. Their world had crumbled in a matter of minutes. Plans for a life of luxury, homes in California, traveling all gone like a soap bubble. There's one more thing, I said, rising from the couch and leaning on my cane. I'm going to the police tomorrow morning. I'll be filing a fraud report. What fraud? Corbin turned even paler. A forged death certificate is fraud. Receiving money on forged documents is also fraud. Selling someone else's property without the owner's consent is fraud. But the statutes of limitations, they haven't expired, I interrupted. The DA's office will have enough evidence to prosecute. Lynette burst into tears, realizing they were facing not only loss of money, but also jail time. We can negotiate, Corbin tried to bargain. We'll get all the money back, cancel all the deals. Just don't go to the police. I looked at him long and hard, assessing his sincerity. All the money, I said finally, every last dime, and a vow that you will never come into my life again. Agreed, immediately exclaimed both of them. We'll see, I replied skeptically. We'll see if you're capable of keeping your word for once in your life. I headed for the living room exit, but stopped at the door and turned around. By the way, I added, the locksmiths are coming tomorrow to change the locks, so if you plan on taking anything out of the house, you'd better do it today. And I walked out of the house, leaving them alone with the shards of their greedy dreams. The next morning, I woke up at Davis and Rowena Blackthorn's house, where I'd spent the night after my confrontation with Corbin and Lynette. The dream was restless, full of fragmentary memories of last night, of my son and daughter-in-law's faces as they realized their plans had fallen apart. But when I finally woke up, I felt calmer than I had in weeks. Rowena met me in the kitchen with a cup of hot coffee and a worried look. How are you feeling, Wayne? She asked, sitting me down at the table and sliding me a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon. Better, I answered honestly. For the first time in a long time, I know who I'm dealing with. Davis joined us, already dressed and ready to go. What are you planning on doing today? Restoring order, I said, cutting into my scrambled eggs. I'll start with the bank, then the insurance company, then I'll take care of the company. And the police? I was quiet for a moment, mulling over my answer. I'll see how they fulfill their promises. If they return the money and disappear from my life, maybe there'll be no criminal case. You're too soft on them, Davis shook his head, after what they've done. Maybe, I agreed, but Corbin is still my son, even after everything that's happened. The first thing I did was go to the First National Bank of Bethany Beach, where I had my main accounts. Mr. Harrington, a senior manager I'd known for 15 years, looked as if he'd seen someone come back from the dead. Mr. Aldridge, he blinked a few times, making sure he wasn't hallucinating. But, we received your death certificate from your son. The certificate is forged, I informed him, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. I am alive, as you can see, and I demand that all my accounts be unlocked immediately. Harrington nervously adjusted his tie. But procedures. We'll need to check the documents. Make sure they're authentic. Mr. Harrington, I interrupted calmly, you've known me for 15 years. I'm sitting before you alive and well. What more proof do you need? He nodded, still in a state of shock. Of course, sir. I will instruct you to unlock your accounts immediately. And what about your son? I mean, with the documents he provided? My son acted without my knowledge or consent. All of his actions related to my finances are considered null and void. Harrington quickly wrote down my words. Understood. And the $1 million deposit Mr. Corbin Aldridge withdrew from the account last week? I leaned forward. What deposit? He said it was a deposit for the buyers of the company, presented a power of attorney. Show me that power of attorney. Harrington pulled a document out of a folder and held it out to me. I scrutinized the paper. The signature was skillfully forged, but not well enough to fool an expert. It's a forgery, I stated. My son stole $1 million from my account using forged documents. Harrington's face turned dead pale. We didn't know. The documents look genuine. I understand, but now I want a full accounting of all my account transactions over the last month, and I want the bank to initiate procedures to recover the stolen funds. Of course, sir. We'll do our best. I spent the next 2 hours at the bank regaining control of my finances. It turned out Corbin hadn't limited himself to $1 million. Over the course of 3 weeks, he had withdrawn another $500,000 from his accounts in small amounts, each time presenting forged powers of attorney. From the bank, I drove to the office of Atlantic Life Insurance Company, which was to pay out $10 million on a life insurance policy. The agent, Mr. Clarkson, greeted me with as much amazement as the banker. Mr. Aldridge, this is incredible. We've already started the procedure to pay your son's life insurance claim. The procedure must be stopped immediately, I said. I'm alive, therefore there is no basis for payment. But the documents, forged. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital after the plane crash, but I survived. My son knew about it, but chose to withhold the information. Clarkson opened a folder of documents. But we've already wired a $2 million advance. It's standard procedure for large payouts. $2 million. So the total amount Corbin had stolen was $3.5 million. Not a lot of money for a man who made $40,000 a year. I demand you cancel the payout immediately and return the funds already transferred, I said firmly. That might be difficult, Clarkson mewed. Your son has already received the money. We'll need to appeal to him for a refund. Then appeal. And if he refuses, sue. From the insurance company, I drove to the office of my airplane company. What I saw broke my heart. The hangar was padlocked, with crates of equipment lying in the yard, ready for removal. On the gate hung a for sale notice with Roger Falconer's phone number. I opened the hangar with my key and went inside. Most of the equipment had been dismantled and packed into crates. My blueprints and technical documents were lying on the floor. The workbench at which I had spent countless hours was dismantled. Corbin hadn't just sold the company, he'd let the buyers loot it. In the corner of the hangar, a figure in work overalls was revealed. It was Tom Miller, my senior mechanic, who had worked with me for 12 years. "Mr. Aldridge," he rushed toward me, unable to believe his eyes. "My God, we thought you were dead." "I'm alive, Tom," I said, hugging my old friend. "What's going on here?" "Your son said the company is closing down. Fired all of us 3 weeks ago. And last week, Falconer's men came in and started moving the equipment out." "By what right?" "They said they bought the company, showed some paperwork." I looked around the hangar more closely. Not only was the equipment gone, but finished parts, billets, even stockpiles of materials. Falconer had taken out everything of any value. "Tom, call all the guys," I said. "Tell them the company's reopening. Anyone who wants to come back is welcome." "But what about Mr. Corbin?" he said. "Mr. Corbin is no longer involved with this company," I explained. "He acted without my consent." Tom smiled broadly. "That's the best news I've heard all month. All the guys will be glad to be back." I spent the next few hours calling lawyers and preparing documents to undo all the deals Corbin had made. Lawyer Martin Stewart, with whom I'd worked for many years, listened to my story with growing amazement. "Wayne, these are serious charges," he said, looking through the documents. "Fraud, forgery of documents, embezzlement. Your son could get up to 10 years in prison." "I'll give him a chance to make things right," I replied. "If he returns all the money and disappears from my life, maybe he'll avoid jail." "You're too soft. After such a betrayal." "Martin, he remains my son, no matter how bad he is." Stewart shook his head, but began preparing the paperwork to cancel the deals. By evening, most of the official procedures had been completed. The bank accounts were unlocked, the insurance payout canceled, and the deal with Falconer canceled. Roger Falconer was extremely unhappy when I called him to inform him that the contract was null and void. "Mr. Aldridge, but we've already invested considerable resources in preparing the deal." He was indignant. "Your son assured us he had full authority." "My son lied," I replied bluntly. "He had no authority to sell my company." "We demand compensation." "Demand it from Corbin. He's the one who defrauded you. And the $1 million deposit, take it to court, to Corbin." When I got home that evening, the house was empty. Corbin and Lynette were gone, taking their personal belongings with them. The living room was no longer filled with the holiday table, the sales documents, the real estate catalogs, just scattered furniture and signs of hasty packing. On the kitchen table was a note from Corbin. "Dad, we've gone to visit Lynette's parents in Georgia. We'll try to find the money we spent. Forgive us." No remorse, no apology for betrayal, only regret for getting caught. I crumpled up the note and tossed it in the trash. The next few days were spent rebuilding what had been destroyed. Tom Miller and the other employees returned to work with enthusiasm. We began restoring equipment that Falconer had been forced to return by court order. A customer in Miami was still interested in our engines despite the delay in testing. A week later, County Sheriff James Morrison rang the doorbell. "Mr. Aldridge," he said, taking off his hat, "I need to talk to you about your son." "What happened to him?" "He's filed a report with us. Claims you've illegally taken possession of his inheritance and threatened him with physical harm." I laughed. "Sheriff, you realize this is ridiculous, don't you? I can't take possession of my own property." "I understand, but I'm required by law to verify all statements. Can you tell me your side of the story?" I invited Morrison into the house and told him the whole story in detail, showing him the medical records from the hospital, The bank statements, the forged powers of attorney. The sheriff listened intently and shook his head. Your son is in a bad situation, he stated. Grand larceny fraud is a federal offense. I don't want to put him in jail, I said. I just want my money back. And if he doesn't, then let him be liable under the law. Morrison nodded and tucked the notebook into his pocket. I see. By the way, your neighbors were very happy to hear you were alive. They were raising money for a memorial. I know. Corbin and Lynette spearheaded it. Cynical people? The sheriff shook his head. Raising money for a monument to a man they themselves think is dead. A month later, Corbin sent a wire transfer for $2 million, a portion of the stolen money. Attached to the transfer was a letter. Dad, this is all we were able to raise. Sold the house, sold the cars, borrowed from Lynette's parents. We'll get the rest back later. We realized our mistake. $1.5 million was still outstanding, but it was a start. 2 months later, a second transfer came, $800,000. Again, a letter apologizing and promising to return the rest. Corbin never returned the last $700,000. I learned from a private investigator I hired that the son and his wife had moved to Mexico, where they bought a small business and started a new life under false names. I didn't pursue them. $700,000 is a small price to pay for knowing who the people you thought were family were. The company slowly recovered. We got a few new orders, developed an improved version of the engine that caused the crash. Life got back to normal. But now I knew the value of family ties. Blood ties mean nothing without love, respect, and loyalty. Corbin was only biologically my son. My real family were the people who supported me in my time of need. Davis and Rowena Blackthorne, the staff, the friends who were genuinely happy to have me back. I made a new will 6 months after that memorable night. The majority of the inheritance will go to my staff and a charity for the families of pilots killed in the line of duty. Corbin wasn't mentioned in the will. Sometimes in the evenings, sitting in my studio working on new projects, I think about what happened, about how close I came to death, and how much I learned about the people I loved. The plane crash almost killed me physically, but it showed me the moral catastrophe that happened in my family. And for that, strange to say, I am almost grateful to fate. Better to know the truth than to live in illusions. The house seems bigger and quieter now, but I don't feel lonely. I have a business I love, people who respect me, and the quiet conscience of a man who knows his worth. And somewhere in Mexico lives a man who was once my son and is learning to make money through honest labor. Maybe it will do him good. Maybe one day he'll realize that being rich isn't as important as being decent. But that's not my problem anymore. My story ended the night I came home and saw the true faces of the people I thought were family. Everything else is just a consequence of that discovery. And I move on with my life, knowing now exactly who I can trust and who I can't. It's an expensive lesson, but it was worth it.